Good morning. Welcome to the Growth and Thriving Morning Mindset. I'm your host, Dr. Jerry Sunshine Novak, the Biker Psychologist. This morning, our topic, we're going to look at sort of I would never call parenting easy, but I want to look at an easy method by which you can think about parenting. So if you're somebody who's trying to parent more mindfully, you're trying to be intentional about the way you raise your children. I would argue that perhaps the worst approach for raising children is that's how I was raised and I turned out fine. There's just so many different variables, right? You were raised a generation ahead of your children, at least, maybe more. I was raised a generation and a half ahead of my children. I was raised in a different time period, I was raised in a different geographical area, and my children are just not me. So and then of course there's the whole idea of like who decides whether or not I turned out fine, right? The fact that I think I turned out fine means nothing, right? So this whole um, this is how I was raised and I turned out fine is probably I'm not saying it can't work. I'm saying it's not reliable. You can't count on it over and over. So if you're trying to be mindful about how you raise your children, you're trying to be intentional about doing what's best for them. I think my favorite way to think about my parenting comes from the research. And it was a study done by a psychologist named Diana Baumrind back in the 70s. And what she did was she looked at parents. Back in the 70s, she looked only at mothers, right? They didn't really think of fathers as parents. They were more like occasional babysitters. But um, subsequent research suggests that this approach still applies. Um, and they rated mothers on two categories. The first was warmth, and the second was demand. So, warmth is, how frequently do you tell your children you love them? How frequently do you hug them? Do you, if you're walking beside them, do you, like, or standing beside them, helping with homework, do you put your hand on their shoulder? Do you just let them know that they're important to you? Things of that sort. I like to tell my children daily that I love them and that being their dad is my favorite thing in my whole life. So, and I try to make sure I tell them that even when I'm not happy with their behavior, even when I'm punishing them or grounding them or something like that. So the first category is warmth. The second category is demand. How much do you demand of your children? Are they required to get good grades or to at least try hard in school? Do they have chores around the house for which they're responsible? Are they expected to have extracurricular activities, to play sports, to be in clubs or play music or something of that sort? And so the parents ended up falling into four categories. There was high in warmth, high in demand, high in warmth, low in demand. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you have high in demand. I'm sorry, you have um, low in warmth, high in demand, and then low in warmth, low in demand. So low in warmth, low in demand is sort of neglected, right? It's like you're not showing your kids lots of love and affection, but you're also not asking much of them. They're just sort of left to their own devices. What Baumrind did was she followed these kids for a couple of decades, and in their 30s, she assessed how successful they were in life, how healthy their marriages were, how their career trajectory looked, how their financial well being was, and what their overall life satisfaction and happiness and um, not only how much like depression and anxiety and problems did they have, and not just whether they had the problem or the absence of the problem, but also were they thriving? And so we have instruments that we use to evaluate that. Things called, for example, the life satisfaction scale. So you can measure how satisfied somebody is with their life. And what Baumrind found, and what seems to hold true in so many different domains, is that the parents who are high in warmth and also high in demand had the most successful children. Maybe not on a moment to moment basis. Everybody goes through hard times, everybody goes through trials. But as these kids grew up, they had the best self esteem. They had the best self-confidence. They were willing to take risks, willing to experiment. They were not easily beaten by life's challenges. They had healthy relationships with their partners and their own children. They knew how to communicate. They knew how to establish boundaries. They had better life satisfaction. They had better um, financial well-being and career satisfaction. So, um, and some of these, that wasn't all in Baumrine's study, just to be for anybody who's checking my work. Some of these other findings came in subsequent studies. But generally speaking, if we approach people with, especially our children, with high warmth, with lots of love, but also high demand, they do the best. So what's really curious and really interesting is which group did the worst, right? I would have guessed when I was going through graduate school and I was getting my master's and my PhD, I would have guessed that the low warmth and low demand would have done the worst, right? The kids who were kind of just left to raise themselves. They didn't get much love or affection from mom or dad. They also didn't get many responsibilities. I would have guessed that those kids did the worst as adults. Not true. They did the second worst. The kids who did the worst had parents who were high in warmth but low in demand. So parents who loved their children and were friends with their children and showed their children all kinds of affection and gave them gifts and treated them well and took them on vacations, but never asked anything of them. Never asked them to do their chores or to, um, to get good grades. Never demanded that they do after school activities or play sports. Those kids ended up being kind of entitled and sort of fragile. They expected all of the best things in life without having to work for them. That's what entitlement is. And when they didn't get what they wanted, they really had very low distress tolerance. They weren't able to tolerate being upset that they didn't get what they wanted. Kids who are raised high in demand sometimes get punished. They sometimes get grounded. They sometimes are told no or they don't get what they want. And through their formative years, it's upsetting to them. But through practice and rehearsal, they learn to tolerate not always getting what they want, which also might help them learn the skill of delayed gratification for themselves, right? As they get older, learning to save money instead of spend uh, every penny they get, learning to um, not overindulge in um, certain foods or sweets or things as they get older would protect their health. So the kids who were shown all kinds of privilege and love and warmth without given any demands did the absolute worst as adults because they had so much entitlement and expected the world to treat them a certain way and had very poor tolerance for not being treated that way. I guess the kids who were sort of neglected, right? Low warmth, low demand. Um, I don't know that they accomplished a whole lot in their lives. I don't know that they, as adults, that they thrived, but at least their tolerance for distress was developed. So for my own parenting, when I'm dealing with my children, um, I like to make sure that I approach them with both warmth and demand. I try to do this both on a moment by moment basis and also over time. So, on a moment by moment basis, this holds true especially when I'm angry with them or upset with their behavior. I try never to uh, discipline them or interact with them out of anger. So usually, if I'm angry or upset with something they've done, I take a break and I go and I breathe it out, or I, you know, work the energy out on the heavy bag, or do whatever I need to do to chill out a bit. And then once I'm chilled out a bit, I can think about how can I approach this behavior? How can I address this with them in a way that's high in demand, that the behavior is not acceptable, but also shows them love and warmth. That's on a moment to moment basis. On a longer timeline, every couple of months or so, I try to think back and ask myself. I meditate on it or think about it. Am I raising my children in a way that has both demand and warmth? I certainly do it annually as somebody who's raised Jewish on Yom Kippur when we're supposed to reflect back on who we've been in the world. I try to think about what type of parent I've been what type of partner I've been, what type of employee I've been for anybody I might work for. And I try to think about what kind of coach I've been for my clients. But when I consider if I've been a decent parent, that's how I think about it. So I encourage you to think this way about your own parenting. By the way, this holds true not just for parenting. Uh, Leaders who have subordinates who work for them in the military or in a workplace also do best when they treat people with high warmth and high demand. This holds true for training pets. Dogs, for example, respond great to high warmth and high demand. They like to be loved and they like to work. They like to be shown what to do. But for the purpose of this morning's message, this is a simplistic way to help frame what can be a very complicated task, which is parenting. So when I feel overwhelmed, when I feel like I'm drowning in the responsibilities of parenthood, I whittle it down to the simplest terms. Have I been high in warmth? Have I shown my children lots of warmth? And am I being high in demand? Am I requiring good grades? Am I requiring athletics? Am I requiring other after school activities? And I try to do that. So until next time, I'm Dr. Jerry Sunshine Novak, the biker psychologist, saying keep growing until you're thriving.